Good evening, folks, and welcome to lesson 32 on the Gospel of Luke. I'd like to begin this evening by reading Psalm 132. The 32 is merely coincidental. Psalm 132. Remember, O Lord, in David's favor, all the hardships he endured, how he swore to the Lord and vowed to the Mighty One of Jacob. I will not enter my house or get into my bed. I will not give sleep to my eyes or slumber to my eyelids until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling place for the Mighty One of Jacob. Behold, we heard of it in Ephrathah. We found it in the fields of Jaar. Let us go to his dwelling place. Let us worship at his footstool. Arise, O Lord, and go to your resting place, you and the ark of your might. Let your priests be clothed with righteousness. Let your saints shout for joy. For the sake of your servant David, do not turn away the face of your anointed one. The Lord swore to David a sure oath from which he will not turn back. One of the sons of your body I will set on your throne. If your sons keep my covenant and my testimonies that I shall teach them, their sons also forever shall sit on your throne. For the Lord has chosen Zion. He has desired it for his dwelling place. This is my resting place forever. Here I will dwell, for I have desired it. I will abundantly bless her provisions. I will satisfy her poor with bread. Her priests I will clothe with salvation, and her saints will shout for joy. There I will make a horn to sprout for David. I have prepared a lamp for my anointed. His enemies I will clothe with shame, but on him his crown will shine. We are in the Gospel of Luke, as you can see, looking at part 2 of the larger section of chapter 8, verse 5 through chapter 9, verse 17. We're going to be picking it up this evening in chapter 20, or in verse 22. Going through to the end of 9:17, just prior to the conversation that Jesus has with his disciples, concluding with the question, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter giving the answer. Uh, the things that we're going to see this evening, the focus on the authority of Jesus, the importance of faith that is building through this section, and the question that bookends it from the disciples in the boat after Jesus stills the storm to Herod Antipas after he's heard the report of Jesus and is musing to himself, I beheaded John the Baptist. Who then is this man? That question, it's unasked in the middle section and the things going between. I'm going to ask it a couple more times during the course of this class because I think it's building toward Jesus finally turning to his disciples and saying, who do you say that I am? I'm interested in what you have decided about me. And then Peter giving the answer, you are the Christ of God, that we're going to be looking at next week in some detail. So we're going to look at several units, and we're going to go kind of fast, skipping across the top, taking sort of a high view of this section and diving down on a couple of points. Because Jesus is driving at something with these signs that we're going to see. And I want to try and bring it out, the importance of the faith that Jesus is trying to instill in people or trying to engender in the disciples, especially. Because once we hit the end of this section here and Jesus turns to his disciples and talks to them and Peter confesses him, Luke is going to shift gears. He's going to go away from the Galilean ministry and focus almost exclusively on the disciples. There will be more teaching of crowds, but that's not going to be the primary focus. Now Jesus is going to zero in on the disciples because he begins immediately with how the Son of Man is going to go to Jerusalem and be crucified. He hasn't talked about that to this point yet. Not until Peter makes that confession, and then Jesus drops that bombshell on the disciples, and it opens up their eyes, and they're aghast, they're appalled that how can you say you are the Christ and then say you're going to go die? We're going to look at that in a lot more detail next week. There's an interesting phrase in the account of Simeon that's unique to Luke when it's applying to the Messiah and just who the Messiah is. And we're going to study that through Luke real briefly. I say briefly next week. It'll only take us 65 minutes or so to get through it all and draw a couple of conclusions on our own. But tonight we're going to be looking at the authority of Jesus in 5 different accounts here where he stills a storm. He exorcises demons, many demons from a single individual. He's going to heal a woman who has had a flow of blood for a number of years. He's going to resurrect a dead child, and he's going to provide bread for a multitude. He's going to provide food for the multitude. That last miracle sits in an interesting spot between Herod asking, "Who is this man?" and Jesus turning to his disciples and saying, "Who do you say that I am?" There's this miracle in between that is a really defining moment, I think, in Jesus' revelation to his disciples. So we'll spend a few minutes looking at that. I may be hanging too much on that miracle more than it can support, but I think Luke is building a context. I think he's building a continuity here, and I'm trying to look at it from excluding Matthew and Mark's accounts, looking at the way Luke is weaving a thread here and trying to tell us a story about who Jesus is. You remember in Luke chapter 1, verse 4, the purpose of his writing. He's writing to Theophilus so that Theophilus might have certainty of the things that he has been taught. He's writing for that audience of one, with a larger audience view, obviously, but he's writing to that audience of this one Gentile official who is, my opinion, a member of Caesar's household who has heard the gospel through the preaching of Paul prior to Paul's martyrdom. And now Luke is writing to him to go into further detail the things that Theophilus was taught. There's that change of address between Luke chapter 1, where he calls Theophilus most excellent Theophilus, and Acts chapter 1, where he simply calls him Theophilus. I think there's a conversion that takes place in there, but there again, I'm reading an awful lot into the text. But Luke's telling a story. It was a story for Theophilus. Now it's our story. It's a story for us to look at and be enriched by. There's a sub theme here of faith that's going to be repeated a couple of times. He turns to the disciples in the boat after the storm is stilled and says, "Where is your faith?" We'll talk about that when we get there. He talks to the woman who has touched the hem of his garment in order to be cured and tells her, "Daughter, go in peace. Your faith has made you well." And then turns almost immediately to Jairus, who's just heard that his daughter has died, and tells him, "Only believe. Don't fear, only believe, and she will be well." And there's some interesting things that are taking place there. And there's a bunch of responses to Jesus. We had responses to the word in the last section, the importance of hearing and of genuine hearing of the word of God and making a response to it. But Jesus' power demands a response too. And often that response is one of awe or fear. We have the disciples in the boat. They were afraid and they marveled. I want to look, when we get to that point, we'll look at Mark's account because I like how Mark escalates things with the disciples. In the account of the Gerasene demoniac, the townsfolk come out and they see the formerly possessed man sitting there conversing with Jesus clothed, and it says they were seized by great fear. Something unprecedented has happened here, and it frightens them. The woman who touches Jesus' garment, and Jesus says, "Who touched me?" He knows who touched him. She comes trembling before him. She's she is afraid as well. The parents of the child that gets raised were amazed by his power. And the last one just amuses me. Herod is perplexed. Herod is confused. I killed John the Baptist. People are saying that he's raised from the dead. Do I have to do it again? Who is this person? Um, he's confused by Jesus. So I think these accounts here set up the answer to this question that is building. Who is this before whom nature, the spirit world, disease, and death prostrate themselves? I can't remember which commentator I was reading who phrased it that way. Peter's going to give the decisive answer in chapter 9, in verse 20, when he answers Jesus, "You are the Christ of God." That's who this man is, who's doing all of these things. Here we have the Messiah, the Christ, the anointed one of God, standing in our presence, which is why they're so confused when Jesus begins to talk about crosses and crucifixion and dying and being raised from the dead, because that doesn't fit into their equation of what a Messiah is, what a Messiah looks like, what a Messiah does. But we have a long way to go. All of this is introductory matter. Want to look at this text here. I'm going to read the whole thing, and then I'll change slides before I do that. We're going to begin in verse 22, and I will read down through chapter 9, verse 17. Luke chapter 8, verse 22. One day he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side of the lake." So they set out, and as they sailed, he fell asleep. And a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filling with water and were in danger. And they went and woke him, saying, "Master, Master, we are perishing." And he awoke and rebuked the wind and the raging waves, and they ceased, and there was a calm. And he said to them, "Where is your faith?" And they were afraid, and they marveled, saying to one another, "Who then is this, that he commands even winds and water, and they obey him?" Then they sailed to the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. When Jesus had stepped out on land, there met him a man from the city who had demons. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he had not lived in a house, but among the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him and said with a loud voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For many a time it had seized him. He was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the desert. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him, and they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss. Now a large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him to let them enter these. So he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. When the herdsmen saw what had happened, they fled and told it in the city and in the country. Then people went out to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it told them how the demon-possessed man had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned. The man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." And he went away, proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. Now, when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue. And falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. As Jesus went, the people pressed around him, and there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And though she spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. And Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds surround you and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." While he was still speaking, someone from the ruler's house came and said, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." But Jesus, on hearing this, answered him, "Do not fear, only believe, and she will be well." And when he came to the house, he allowed no one to enter with him except Peter and John and James and the father and mother of the girl, or the father and the mother of the child. And all were weeping and mourning for her. But he said, "Do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But taking her by the hand, he called, saying, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned, and she got up at once. And he directed that something should be given her to eat. And her parents were amazed, but he charged them to tell no one what had happened. And he called the 12 together and gave them power and authority over all demons and to cure diseases. And he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal. And he said to them, "Take nothing for your journey, no staff, nor bag, nor bread, nor money, and do not have two tunics. And whatever house you enter, stay there, and from there depart. And whenever they do not receive you, when you leave that town, shake off the dust from your feet as a testimony against them." And they departed and went through the villages, preaching the gospel and healing everywhere. Now Herod the Tetrarch heard about all that was happening, and he was perplexed because it was said by some that John had been raised from the dead, by some that Elijah had appeared, and by others that one of the prophets of old had risen. Herod said, "John I beheaded, but who is this about whom I hear such things?" And he sought to see him. On their return, the apostles told them all that they had done, and he took them and withdrew apart to a town called Bethsaida. When the crowds learned it, they followed him, and he welcomed them and spoke to them of the kingdom of God and cured those who had need of healing. Now the day was beginning to wear away, and the 12 came and said to him, "Send the crowd away to go into the surrounding villages and countryside to find lodging and get provisions, for here we are in a desolate place." But he said to them, "You give them something to eat." They said, "We have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish, unless we are to go and buy food for all these people." For there were about 5,000 men. And he said to his disciples, "Have them sit down in groups of about 50 each." And they did so, and had them all sit down. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing over them. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the crowd. And they all ate and were satisfied. And what was left over was picked up, 12 baskets of broken pieces. Quite a lot to absorb in one class, but we're going to give it the old college try, I guess. Looking at the account of the stilling of the storm. This is Jesus' second miracle over nature, the first being the miraculous catch of fish in Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11, where Peter, after seeing the full nets and the sinking boats, falls at Jesus' feet and says, "Go away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man." Here Jesus is doing something, again, unprecedented in the experience of the disciples. There is going to blow up this large storm on the Sea of Galilee, or Lake Gennesaret. Luke calls it by both terms in his gospel. The word Gennesaret coming from the Hebrew word Kinnereth, which means harp, because the sea is roughly harp shaped. If you look at it on a map, and now all of you are going to turn to the maps in the back of your Bible and look at it and say, "What is it? He's crazy. It doesn't look like a harp." Use your imagination. Look at it with an artist's eye, and you can see there it has roughly a harp shape. Josephus praised the Sea of Galilee because of its sweet water, of its many species of fish. And he praised the surrounding area, the fertile ground there, because the land and the trees yielded fruit and crops for 10 months out of the year. Essentially, he's writing in the War of the Jews, and essentially he's saying this was a town that would be difficult for the Romans to take because it was self-sustaining. This is a region rather that's self-sustaining. They got the lake, they got the rich soil. Leave them alone. They're not bothering anybody. But because of the warm air rising off the lake, it's also known for some sudden and rather violent storms. And so they get into this boat to go to the other side of the lake. Jesus has an appointment with this guy who has the demons on the other side. The disciples aren't aware of this, but Jesus knows where he's going and what he's going to do, both between the time they leave and the time they get there. He's tired because he's been ministering to people all day long, pretty much nonstop. He falls asleep, and so there's a boatload of people. Jesus, the 12, possibly the women who were ministering to them. It would be a large enough vessel to take on a good 20 or so individuals. And they begin sailing across the lake, and we're told that the storm comes sudden, and a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filling with water and were in danger. Some of these disciples here who are with Jesus, they're veteran fishermen. They are not, as one writer of, I think, Mark's account suggested, that they were being a bit dramatic in their panic over the nature of the storm. They're seeing the storm through their professional eyes. They've been fishing on this lake for years and have been successful at it. They're used to the temperament of the lake, if you will. And so when they assess that they're in danger from their point of view. This is their professional opinion. Jesus is asleep. They go and they wake him, crying out to him, Master, Master, saying it twice, we are perishing. Here's a title of respect, showing that Jesus is the authority figure in this group. Mark's account says in Mark chapter 4:38, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? I think Luke's toning down what Mark reported to him, or the other eyewitnesses reported to him. And Matthew puts it very bluntly, save us, Lord, we are perishing. They're looking to Jesus for rescue. They're looking to Jesus to do something. I'm not sure they have in mind exactly what it is that Jesus is going to do, but they're turning to him because they've exhausted their efforts. There's a lesson in there somewhere about how maybe we should turn to God before we exhaust all our efforts, and maybe turn to him first, rather than exhausting all our efforts. But it's interesting that Jesus doesn't pray. He doesn't beseech the Father to calm the storm. He simply speaks to the storm. Luke uses the same language here that he did earlier during the exorcism, the first one. It's in Luke chapter 4, in verse 35. Jesus rebuked the demon, saying, be silent and come out of him. So he's using language similar to that of an exorcism. That's led some interpreters, here we go off on a tangent, that's led some interpreters to say that Luke is writing from the perspective of the first century reader, who would be very familiar with the traditions of the ancient Near East. Every ancient Near Eastern civilization that ever lived wrote about the seas as the place where chaos lives. The demons live in the waters. The serpents live in the waters because the waters are unpredictable. The waters are turbulent. You have the Babylonian tradition of Marduk and Tiamat, and Marduk overcoming the chaos monster from the sea, and then the birthing of the world. So they look at the sea as a place of the abode of demons. And rather than, because they don't understand nature like we understand nature, they don't understand that the heat rising off of the lake is what's contributing to storms. Their grasp of meteorological science is kind of shaky at this point. They don't have Doppler radar to tell when the storms are coming in. And so they look at the storm and they think this is activity of a demon. I think that's carrying it a little bit too far, perhaps, for the mindset of the disciples, because these are Jews. It's an interesting study. It's an interesting tangent to go off on, and I don't want to venture any further down that path, but rather Jesus does what only God can do. Only God can still the storm. Look at Psalm 107. Beginning in verse 23. Psalm 107, verse 23, some went down to the sea in ships, doing business on the great waters. This is a psalm of deliverance, where various individuals get into situations, usually of their own making and devising, and the situations go south and they cry out to God for deliverance, and he delivers them. Some went down to the sea in ships, doing business on the great waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, his wondrous works in the deep. For he commanded and raised the stormy wind, which lifted up the waves of the sea. They mounted up to heaven. They went down to the depths. Their courage melted away in their evil plight. They reeled and staggered like drunken men and were at their wits' end. And they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. When they were glad that the waters were quiet, and he brought them to their desired haven. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. It makes me think of, because Chad was just doing the children's videos on Jonah, it makes me think of the calm that came when Jonah was thrown overboard, and how freaked out the sailors of that boat must have been when over goes the man and calm goes the sea. And the response that they had there, where they offered sacrifices and they vowed vows, doing what only God can do. Jesus rebukes the wind. He rebukes the waves. The waves go calm, and the disciples respond with fear, asking, who is this then that commands even the wind and the sea? It's interesting that Jesus does not describe them as faithless, but rather says, where is your faith? Where was your faith? Where was your faith at this moment? So the disciples have faith, and he's acknowledging that they have faith in him. But here, in the heat of that crisis, it had abandoned them. From my point of view, it's an understandable thing. I've never been out on a really stormy sea raging when the boat is threatening to be swamped. I like kayaking on flat water, and if a speedboat goes by and the wake is coming in, I look at that and I think, oh dear, I need to turn into it so that I don't get capsized by it. But I've never been in a situation where there's been true peril from the sea. And these disciples who are professionals are reacting with fear based on years of experience being here in the sea. But Jesus questioned, where is your faith? In other words, by now you ought to have more trust. By now this faith ought to have grown. You've seen other things that I have done. Maybe it's the fact that Jesus was asleep and not doing anything that caused them to, hey, we need to go wake up the guy who can do something about this. We need to wake up Jesus because he'll know what to do. So I think there's faith there, but it's not the faith that Jesus is seeking. We're aiming at that. We're going to hit that in just a moment. So they're filled with awe and they marvel. Who is this that even the winds and the water obey him? They get to the area of the Gerasenes in Gentile territory, and here we find a man who has been dehumanized by Satan. He's naked as a beast would be naked. He's been stripped of his dignity, doesn't live in a house, but lives in the graveyard. He doesn't fit into society, but has been driven out by the demon out into the wilderness. He's been bound. He's been guarded. He's considered a threat. He's a dangerous individual. And he comes to meet Jesus and falls down before him and cries out to him, the demon does, "What have you to do with us? Jesus, Son of the Most High God, I beg you, do not torment me." And it's interesting that this account and its parallels are the only time when Jesus has a conversation with a demon. The demon that is possessing this man, by asking him his name. And the demon responds to him saying, "Legion," which means there's a lot of demons there. In the time of Augustus, a Roman legion was comprised of 5,600 troops, 5,600 soldiers. If he's not being figurative, if the demon's not being figurative, that's a lot of demons. In Mark's account, we know that there's about 2,000 swine in this herd of pigs, and they all go trundling off into the water like lemmings and drown. This man's condition it's worse than that of Mary Magdalene that we read about earlier in Luke chapter 8 and verse 2. Mary Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had been driven out. Here is a man who has been possessed by a great number more than that. And it's very interesting that they ask to be sent into the pigs. The demons beseech Jesus. They beg Jesus, "Don't send us into the abyss." I think it's fair to say that demons, James tells us that the demons believe that God is and they tremble. Even demons don't like hell. Even demons fear the judgment of God and fear the judgment that they know that is coming. The thing that was amusing to me as I was reading through this is some of not the sources I was reading, they were referring to other sources, referring to the objections that are raised to this miracle on the basis that a loving Jesus wouldn't harm innocent pigs. The pigs didn't belong to Jesus. He had no right to do this. Jesus caused a great financial loss to their owners. I can almost see teaching this down on a children's level and trying to, and the kids saying, "Well, it's not fair. It's not fair to the pigs. What did the pigs ever do?" There's answers to all of this. I'll give answers to these 3, but I think the most important thing is these pigs got to show the glory and the power of God. These are the most famous pigs that ever lived because they've been memorialized for some 2,000 years. Jesus wouldn't do that to an innocent pig. Remember, Jesus is a Jew. Pigs are unclean. And he's already taught that the man is more valuable than pigs. Matthew chapter 6, verse 26, and Matthew chapter 10, verse 31, where he says, "Your Father in heaven knows the sparrows of the air, and you are worth more than many sparrows." The man is more valuable than the animals are. Well, the pigs didn't belong to Jesus. Says who? Look at Psalm 50. Maybe I'm off base in what it says here, but I think it's pretty clear. Psalm 50, verses 10 and 11. "For every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the hills, and all that moves in the field is mine." Those pigs belong to God. They're his pigs. He can do what he wants with his pigs. He created them, just like he created me and can do as he wills with me. Jeremiah, and the lesson there when Jeremiah goes down to the house of the potter and sees the clay vessel ruined in the potter's hand, and so he reshapes it into something else. And God likens the clay to the nation of Israel and says, "Can't I do as I will to Israel? Don't I have that right?" God is sovereign. He owns the pigs. The loss of the herd of pigs cost the owners a great deal of money. I think that matters of the spirit take precedence over matters of the flesh. And Jesus is teaching that lesson there in a kind of roundabout way. But he gives them permission. Why does Jesus do it this way? Why doesn't Jesus simply cast the demons out like he's done before? I think for the purpose of the witnesses. Here is the man who has been violent and destructive. And the demons go out of him into the herd of pigs. And now the pigs become violent and destructive and destroy themselves, go trundling down the side of the cliff and into the water, and they drown. One commentator raised the objection that pigs know how to swim. Do demon-possessed pigs know how to swim? It's a nonsensical question. The pigs are destroyed. Don't ask me what happens to the demons. I've already speculated way out further than I want to speculate. Jesus does this because the herd masters are going to go back and report what's happened. And everybody's going to come out and see this. This is a thing that is going to be witnessed by all. They come out to Jesus and they see the man sitting there clothed, speaking with Jesus. And their response is fear. Go away. Leave. Some people are going to see the power of God and want to run away from it. They're going to want to withdraw from it. They're going to want to stand more than arm's length away. They want nothing to do with this. And so they ask Jesus to leave. They beg Jesus, please leave our country, leave this area. The man from whom all the demons were cast out begs to go with Jesus. His response is the opposite. I want to follow you. He's grabbing on to the only example of discipleship he has seen, and that there are these people following Jesus who have come with him, and now he wants to be one of them. Jesus doesn't reject the man as a disciple. What he does is redirect him. He says, go and tell everyone you meet what God has done for you, what God has done for you. And he went away proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. Is the man equating Jesus with God? Or he's seeing in Jesus at least a vessel through whom the power of God has been channeled. And so he becomes the first missionary for Jesus. He is the first mission trip, going into the Gentile community and telling everybody he meets what a difference Jesus has made in his life. Do you think he ever forgot? I can't imagine that he did, that he ever forgot what Jesus had done for him. 15 minutes, huh? We're less than halfway through. No, actually we're exactly halfway through. So this might be a two-part lesson, because I don't want to go so fast that I just frazzle your head and you don't get anything out of it. They get back in the boat and they return back to where they came from, back to where they had been. And the crowd is there waiting for him. They welcome him. They've been waiting for him to come back. I don't know if he had given some sort of travel itinerary or what, but we have now an account that is really interesting. There's a double miracle that takes place. And it's interesting because both of these miracles are private. The woman, we know from Matthew and Mark's account, has been thinking to herself, if I just touch the hem of his robe, I'll be healed. While Jesus is following this synagogue ruler back to his house to take care of his little girl who is gravely, gravely ill, the woman tells no one what she's planning, what she's going to do. And when Jesus heals or raises the girl from the dead, he tells the parents, don't tell anyone what has happened here, as though it could be kept secret. And the girl was dead. The people who were there knew she was dead. He's not suggesting to them, okay, keep her locked up in a closet, never let anybody see her again. Rather, now we might get to that at a later date, because there's some interesting thoughts there. But both of these miracles take place sort of in private, but they become known, they become exposed. Jairus is a man of importance. He's a ruler in the synagogue. He ranks sort of high in the organized religion, the organized Judaism of the day, that has to this point not been terribly receptive to Jesus. But you remember when we were talking back in Luke chapter 5, we were painting the Pharisees with a really big brush. Not all the Pharisees rejected Jesus. Some of them believed him. Some of them followed him. Some of them did it in secret for fear of the Jews, but some, I think, did so openly. Jairus here comes to Jesus in person. He doesn't send a servant. He comes to Jesus in person to beg him, to implore him, to please come to his house, to heal his daughter, because his daughter, actually the text doesn't say to heal his daughter. And there came a man named Jairus, who was ruler of the synagogue, and falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to her house. Is there faith there? Is there faith in that request? He's obviously heard reports of Jesus, of the miracles that Jesus has performed. Is there faith that Jesus can do the same for his daughter? Keep that in the back of your mind, because Jesus is going to turn to him here in just a moment and say, believe, and she will be well. As they're going, here comes this woman. She's unimportant. That's my word. Please don't don't send me hate email. I understand she was an important individual. All individuals are important in the eyes of God. But she's the opposite end of the social spectrum of Jairus. Jairus is an established ruler and a leader in the community. Here is this woman who spent every penny she had on physicians who've been unable to heal her. And I think that's an interesting turn of phrase that Luke uses, Luke being the physician, says at the end of verse 43, she could not be healed by anyone. Yeah, to society, she's unimportant. Christy, you're right. That's the correct way to put it. From their perspective, Jairus would be the important man, this woman, not so much so. So she makes her way through the crowd, and she touches the hem of Jesus' garment, and immediately she's healed. She's not anonymous to Jesus. This doesn't catch him unawares. He's not taken by surprise when he feels the power go out of him. In this interchange that he has where he says, who touched me? And everybody denies it. And Peter says, look, Lord, everybody's touching you. How on earth can you say, who touched me? And Jesus says, no, power went out of me. He knows who she is, knows her parentage back to Noah. He knows everything about her. He's not trying to call her out to embarrass her, but rather so that she can make a public confession of what Jesus has done. Remember the incident with the pigs just a moment ago. There's going to be witnesses to this event, witnesses to what Jesus has done. Here she's witnessing, she's going to testify to the crowd what she had done and how she had been immediately healed. She's the second ritually unclean woman to have touched Jesus in Luke's gospel, the first being in Luke chapter 7, the sinful woman at the house of Simon the Pharisee, who weeps and washes his feet with her tears and wipes them with her hair and kisses them and anoints his feet with the expensive ointment. Here, a second woman who comes and touches Jesus, and he doesn't recoil from her in horror. It was like I think it was Frank addressing how Jesus touching the leper, and how does he not become unclean in doing so? Jesus is not threatened by the contamination of my life, because I can't be so unclean that he cannot make me clean. That's the power of his grace. That's the power of God. He turns to her and says to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." And now here comes the servant of Jairus. And this is where his faith gets tested, I think. The servant says, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." The messenger says, "Yeah, it's too late. There's no hope." Jairus could react in anger, because why on earth did you delay with this woman? You could have come to my house and you could have taken care of my daughter while there's still breath in her body. Why did you delay? But he doesn't. The servant sees no point in continuing. The messenger sees no point in continuing. Jesus replies using the same words he just used to the woman. "Believe, and she will be well." He says to the woman, "Your faith has made you well. Go in peace." Believe, she will be well. Jairus is, what do you do? If you're the father of that little girl, what do you do? He goes on with Jesus. I think here's a step of faith. I think here we see the faith of coming to him and pleading with him, "Come to my house." Now when hope is gone, at least from the perspective of a human being, he's taking a step of faith. Jesus, he's just seen a miracle take place, even if he's not really too clear of what exactly has happened, except for the testimony of the woman. A miracle has taken place. Maybe another miracle can take place. Maybe he's heard the report of the raising of the son of the widow in Nain, which was in the far southern part of the region of Judea. But he goes with Jesus. They come into his house, and Jesus lets only Peter, James, and John, the mother and the father, go into the room. And as they go into the house, everybody there is weeping and mourning. And he says, "Do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping." Jesus isn't making a diagnosis of the girl's condition, but rather a prognosis of what it's going to be. She's dead. She's going to get better. And then he goes into the room and tells the little girl to do what she can't do. "Child, arise." The authority of Jesus is such that the girl can do nothing but obey. The life is going to return to her body. She is going to sit up, and immediately he turns to his parents. He returns the child to her parents and tells them, "Give her something to eat." And her parents were amazed. I think Jairus takes a big step of faith here. There's the woman and Jairus have one thing in common. They have this desperate need to be saved from the condition that the circumstances they're in. Jairus with his daughter's illness, the woman with her own illness. They have this desire for healing and a belief that Jesus has the power to provide it. But they have to take that public step of faith. The woman does it in private, okay? She comes up behind Jesus and touches him. If she had just scurried off into the crowd and disappeared, would she still have been healed? That's a can of worms that we can speculate on. And next week, Peter can teach a class addressing whether or not she would have been healed. Just make note of that, Peter. Instead, she comes before Jesus and makes a public confession of what she did and why she did it And Jesus says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Jairus comes into his house. The people are mourning. They're crying. The relatives are there. He's been told your daughter is dead. That must have been a gut punch for him to hear as he's on his way to the house with the man he believes might be able to do something about this, who then turns to him and says, keep on believing and she'll be well. Now he has that decision to make. Do I listen to the crowd? Do I go with the majority opinion that she's dead and there's no hope and just join in the mourning? Or do I hang on to this individual about whom I've heard these reports? Do I listen to him? Do I take that step of faith and go into the room where my daughter's body lays with this man and see what he can do? And I think I might be reading a lot into this, and I admit, I may be over dramatizing the moment here, but I think Jairus has to make that decision, and he makes it on the instant that he's going to go all in with Jesus. He goes in. Jesus speaks to the body of his dead daughter and says, "Child, arise," and now she's alive. Here's a ruler of the synagogue. Do you think he ever forgot what Jesus did? I think every time he looked at his daughter, he remembered. He remembered Jesus and what he had done. And it's interesting that as Jesus tells the demoniac, go tell everybody, he tells Jairus and his wife, tell no one. Be silent about this. The ministry, the Galilean ministry, is already becoming so overwhelming that he can't move anywhere without the crowds. Hold on to this moment of faith that you have and keep it within, keep it for yourself. Next week, I'm going to stop here because I really want to spend time on the miracle of the feeding. It's interesting in David Garland's commentary on Luke and the Zondervan exegetical commentary series, he had this statement here at the conclusion of this miracle. He says, Allied troops found the following words written on a basement wall when they entered Cologne, Germany in World War II. It captures the kind of faith that Jesus is seeking. And the words were, I believe in the sun even when it is not shining. I believe in love even when feeling it not. I believe in God even when God is silent. And we have a thing hanging in our bedroom that says, believe when it is beyond reason to believe. With Jesus, there's always a reason to believe, even if we can't see it. And the disciples are really going to be challenged when it comes to this period of time when they're out in Bethsaida in the wilderness, and they've got this enormous crowd around them. And Jesus turns to his disciples and says, give them something to eat. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail next week when we get to that. I'm catching up here now with the chat log here. I think there were times when Jesus healed when it did not further his ministry. He took pity on them. Yeah, God is indiscriminately good. He sends his goodness on everybody and leaves it to us how we're going to respond to him, in how we're going to respond to the display of his power in our lives on a daily basis, to the authority of his word in our lives on a daily basis. It's an interesting study. Next week, we'll pick up in Luke chapter 9, verse 1, and we'll get down through verse 20. I might end with the study on Luke's very interesting use of the term Messiah in his gospel. Let me stop the recording. I hit the wrong button there. There it is.